You know, if you ask the average CIO who is his or her customer, one of the things that has always galled me is oftentimes they will refer to colleagues of theirs. And for those who say that, there is a declared distance between IT and the value that is being created in IT. And I think that's really meaningful. I think that words matter. Of course, actions matter that much more. So we really wanted to have a discussion about the methods and mechanisms that leading tech executives, like the ones that I'm joined by today, what are they doing to get closer to the customer, to glean insights from them as to how IT can actually create value across the enterprise, and so on. And hopefully we can start an evolution, if not a revolution, towards IT thinking of itself as just part of the business and in fact a value contributor to the business in a very significant way. Roger Granati, I wanted to start with you. You were the Executive Vice President and Chief Information and Technology Architect at Verizon. You have been with that organization since before it was called Verizon. And actually, you have had a front row seat to extraordinary consumer innovation, from dial-up to high speed, from all the different Gs, where you're now working on 5, I believe, to having content now distributed on all sorts of devices that didn't exist when you joined the organization. And as a result, having spent a tremendous amount of time in the field, so to speak, with customers, and actually as a consumer of all those different services and products as well, you've been able to see some leading indicators as to the evolution of customer experience. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where you see us now in terms of that evolution towards customer experience, and tying it back, of course, since we're joined here by so many chief information officers, of IT's role in impacting that.
Yep. So Peter, those were 15 questions. I'll try to give you a succinct answer. So, I think the intimacy with customers starts as a whole organization. It's really cultural. And we at Verizon, I've been with the company since its inception in 2000. But Verizon and its predecessor companies for about 30 years, my entire telecommunications journey, and been through probably 60 mergers and acquisitions through that journey, and that's what Verizon is today. But it's really every part of Verizon is focused on the customers. And we look at customers, we serve about 125 million consumers in the United States, and then we have about 200,000 enterprise and government customers globally through our global IP networks. And technology plays a central role. Technology is so pervasive in our customers' daily lives. Everything our customers do from the moment they wake up in the morning to when you go to sleep, the way they communicate, the way they entertain themselves, or the way they work, it's all technology-centric, and technology plays a key role in how Verizon serves our customers. So that is a key ingredient that I often find that is somewhat different at Verizon versus other enterprises. But you're right. It's been fascinating to watch the early days of computing and networking to internet access. And the last decade's been about cloud computing and ubiquitous mobility, where people are always connected to the apps and services. But now we're entering an era where it's not just people, it's everything is getting connected. The terms like Internet of Things or Internet of Everything. So if you're, no matter which industry you're in, business models are disrupting and changing because it's no longer humans that have to make the decisions, but the whole decision cycle is getting compressed, and the whole world is becoming very programmable, which is happening through everything getting connected, from cars to even in the retail business. Things are changing where the way customers are engaging with merchandising in the retail environment, et cetera, is changing. So it's been fascinating to watch that, and My role actually changed about a year ago. I used to be the CIO for the third time through my career, but now I'm an architect, and some of our board members and the executive team, as we thought about how rapidly the digital world is changing and how rapidly our business as a result is changing. We're no longer just a telecommunications or broadband and wireless provider. We are providing digital media and content services. We're into digital advertising. We're into Internet of Things. We're into cloud and data analytics and security solutions for our enterprise customers, et cetera, et cetera. We felt it was important to create a new role which really bridges the business strategy and the technology strategy. So that's the role that I play. But our technology focus is centered around the customers. How can we help improve the lives of our customers on a daily basis? How can we help enterprises engage their customers with new digital solutions that we provide to them? And as a result, the entire society gets better, and that's how Verizon thinks about the marketplace.
Excellent, good overview. Stephanie, you began your career at the World Bank doing the work of the World Bank. You were in development and investments in field in the former Soviet Union, and have a very traditional background in terms of the business of the World Bank, but a very non-traditional background when it comes to IT. You became an IT executive at IFC, the International Finance Corporation under the World Bank, and then 4 years ago became the first ever group level World Bank CIO. And having gotten to know the World Bank a little bit, the bank has two audacious goals. One is to end extreme poverty by 2013, and another is create shared prosperity sustainably. And I wonder if you could take a moment to talk about IT's role in that.
So audacious wouldn't cover it. They're fantastic goals and fantastic missions. And when I actually became the CIO, Jim Kim hadn't come to the bank yet. And
the current president.
The current president, who actually really helped us frame these goals, and the goals that ultimately have now become the Sustainable Development Goals for the UN, so to replace the Millennial Development Goals. And I looked at our organization, and for 10 years we had underinvested in technology, and we had really become a cost to be contained. We had no seat at the table. We weren't talking to the right people. So the first question was, how do we switch that dialogue? And just about the same time, the president came and said, listen, we need to really change the way the bank itself works, and how do we actually create sustainable development? How do we alleviate poverty? So the first thing we did, very much to what Atticus was talking about this morning, was we reorganized. And we had technology teams all over. We had them in my stacks, we had them in operations, and they were doing lots of different things and building apps for themselves because the technology teams couldn't deliver. So we pulled all of those people into one organization, and we, in essence, created product groups, all of what Atticus was talking about, that face off against the business. So we have 3 CIOs who are business-facing CIOs, and they come from the business. They're very strong technically, they're all engineers, but they can bridge the gap between what do our staff need to be effective in terms of getting their jobs done, and what do we need from a technology perspective. And that's really changed, first, our dialogue with the business. And then second, our ability to really deliver what we wanted to do. The second thing we did was create our strategy. So we actually looked at the bank group strategy and said, okay, well, if the bank really wants to alleviate poverty, how in the world are they going to do it without the right technology? So we just shifted the entire dialogue and said, our technology is going to be about SMAC. So we have really gone from on-prem, everything locked down, to a cloud-first, mobile-only strategy where we've chosen all the corporate devices so that people can get access to anything, anytime, anywhere, and that includes 186 countries. So, when you're in South Sudan, you should be able, from your mobile device, to be able to get back into our network. So we've set some really high bars for our staff who are actually out trying to alleviate poverty and create shared prosperity, which I think is really important. And then the final thing, I think, very much leverages what both Ben and Atticus were saying. We created a client customer group. And so I actually hired some consumer product marketing people to come in, and we have a UX group, and we spend a lot of time with those clients saying, how are we going to teach you what you need to know with these new applications, and how do we build these applications in ways that are so intuitive that you don't really need us in the end anyway. And that communications team has done a fabulous job moving us forward.
That's great, thank you. Mike McNamara, about 8 months ago, you transitioned from the UK, where you were the CIO of Tesco, to a city that none of your friends had heard of, Minneapolis, Minnesota, to become the CIO of Target. And I was intrigued in getting to know your story a bit, that one of the early stages as an advocate for CIOs and their teams to spend time in the field, whatever the field is in each of your cases, that one of the first things you did was spend a week in a store and work every job, even the register. And that this is something that actually people do again and again from time to time, just as a refresher as to how is this business done, what is customer experience like, what is the feedback, both from associates as well as customers. Can you talk a bit about that experience and talk about the sanctity of ensuring that there's always this touch point with customers?
Sure, and look, I'll draw on some of my Tesco experiences as well, since I was there for 17 years and I've only been at Target for 8 months. So,
right.
Forgive me if I do that. I mean, I think there's a ton you can tell about customers from data, and we get more and more data every day. So there are richer sources and there are more sources. So you can do a whole lot of very clever stuff, very clever data science, very clever analytics. But what doesn't flow through in the bits and bytes really is either intent or emotion. So you don't understand actually how the customer really feels about the brand, feels about experiences, and you don't necessarily understand their intent. And to do that, you really got to overlay that kind of, the bits and bytes with experience. And the only way you're going to get experience is to go out in the field and get experience. Go out there and talk to customers. And I've had a lot of kind of sobering experiences, I guess, over the years on so doing. I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s, Tesco were very, very far advanced in food and grocery online. I think it's probably still the biggest food and grocery online provider in the world. But certainly back in the early 2000s, we're being lauded as fantastic innovators, all that kind of good stuff. I had my picture in Business Week in a big article. And then you follow that up by spending a day in the call center listening to customers phoning in. And you go from feeling that you're master of the universe to feeling that you're a bit of an imbecile. But, and that's really the only way you're going to get that is by actually, really, really stepping out and engaging with customers. So yeah, we used to spend a week in store every year. So doing all the jobs, which gave you a really good understanding of actually how the business operated in the store and how your decisions you made centrally actually impacted the lives of team members in the stores, and of course impacted the experience of your customers. So done many such things over the years, but it is vitally important. One, I'll kind of reiterate what you said earlier, Peter, is that the only customers are our customers. They're the ones that come into our shops or visit our website and buy things from us. Nobody else is a customer, they're colleagues. So but to get in tune with that customer, you just got to get out there. You got to get out there and talk to them. You got to do shop-alongs. You got to visit them in their homes. You got to do all of those things, and that puts a rich layer over the kind of the data that you can ingest through transaction history and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I've spoken with so many people over the years about how when you have CIOs and tech executives involved in sales, especially in B2B type situations, oftentimes the yield on sales will rise because so often now the person you're selling to, even if they're not a technology executive, has a very profound degree of sophistication, and their questions will reflect that. And so having that, a closer touch point becomes that much more important. And I wanted to actually turn to you, Ron. Ron, you were the co-founder and president of Think Big, data analytics organization, services advisory, purchased by Teradata. And that which gets measured gets done. And a lot of what you've done in your work with people like folks in this room and other technology executives is help them measure the effectiveness of their analytics campaigns, and in so doing, become closer to customers and have better customer insights. Can you share and reflect on some examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually wanted to build on a point Mike was making, which is, you have this potential, right, where by understanding the customer, you can develop a lot of hypotheses, right, by going out in the field and having leaders in the business. But how do you foster that collaboration? How do you make it easier to test those ideas? Right? I mean, the beautiful thing about big data, I've had the honor of working in this space for almost 10 years, is we now have the ability to not just look at things like transactions, but behavioral data, right? Mobile data from people walking around, supply chain data from connected supply chains, manufacturing data, right? So we have all these new data sources that are available for us, and so if we get the right partnership, the business and technology teams can come together, right? So we have customers where we do things like have a center of excellence around data and analytics where the key business leaders are ultimately driving. In one case, transformative CIO came in and created this and took the lead, but brought the business in and took all these siloed, pocketed efforts and said, let's put together more of a common big data platform and do things like have metrics that don't start with what's the ROI, but how do we measure things like, do we have complete data? Do we have data quality? Are we doing experiments, right? Are we seeing the turnover and success in using this platform? And things like fostering innovation with hackathons. So you can get in and say, let's sit down together and measure and show what might be possible, right? So it's a journey, and our customers are typically starting with, do we have the right strategy? How do we leverage all this new data to have an impact on our customers? Then how can we have an environment where we trust the data at all, that we can have complete data in an agile way. We don't have to do a ton of work up front to model it, but we can capture it all. And then get into the interesting stuff, the analytics. I think a lot of times people have this misconception that data science is about having a bunch of kind of philosophers on payroll who sit there and muse about the next thing, whereas we see it a lot more directed. But usually before you get into data science, just having insight into what is the consumer even doing, right? When you see the paths of consumer behavior going through channels like a call center and the website or mobile apps, you start realizing, wow, there's some obvious things that are coming out now we can actually even see, right? So a lot of times getting closer to the customer starts by even just looking at all the behavioral data and then starting to do more sophisticated modeling and data science that ultimately leads to real-time interaction, right? And we have customers in a variety of industries, whether it's financial, like blending call center data in financial retail with online interactions, whether it be high-tech manufacturing. There's a lot of variation in the type of customer and the type of interaction in B2B versus B2C. But a common thing is all this great behavioral data you were talking about before is now available. And now there's an opportunity to use it, but also a requirement, right? That we're seeing disruptors enter all kinds of industries, right? I mean, our discussion last night from Andreessen Horowitz, they talk about the industrialist dilemma, that suddenly industries that were safe from digital disruption are no longer, right? And guess what's happening to every one of these disruptors? They're using these tools of big data to get closer to the customer, to understand them in a deeper way, and experiment and drive results.
That's great. One of the trends that everyone seems to be talking about these days is the Internet of Things. It's already come up a little bit in some of the anecdotes. And Roger, yours is an organization that is already capitalizing tremendously in this space with ThinkSpace, which is sort of a mobility and IoT enabler, and is really transforming in some ways the way of creating value for customers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so ThinkSpace is our platform that connects the network and connectivity layer to various applications and services, to various sensors or mobile phones, the entire stack. It's an open platform, open APIs. It has grown at the last count, which was a couple of weeks ago. We have about close to 5,000 of our customers, business customers, that are using this platform to transform and digitize their businesses and their business models. And so it's about data. So you collect all the data, whether if you're in the manufacturing space or transportation space, all the data about your entire value chain, all the way from what service you provide or what goods you manufacture, end to end from your suppliers to the customers. And so it's got a lot of data collection and open interfaces, and you create that using our platform. And it continues to evolve, and it's really fascinating to watch because data analytics space used to be about gathering tons of data and then analyzing the data to find out what happened and even try to predict what might happen next. But now we're moving into where the entire value chain is becoming programmable, is becoming software driven. So rather than trying to understand what happened or what might happen and then rely on some human being to make a decision, and now with deep learning and different algorithms, the stuff is getting so automated where things happen instantaneously. And it's really fascinating how fast this thing is moving. And as you said, it's there were certain industries obviously that were ripe for digital disruption, but now even a lot of the industries that deal with physical goods are picking up on a new way of running their business models. And even inside Verizon, we use, we eat our own dog food. We use our own platforms and technologies. So I'll give you one internal example. We have about 35,000 technicians that maintain our wireless and wireline networks. About 30,000 trucks. You probably have seen some of our trucks driving around. And the entire ecosystem is now digitized, automated. So we've got sensors in the trucks. We've got RFID. We know all the spare parts that are in the trucks. We know what skills the technicians have, and using algorithms, the right truck with the right configuration, with the right parts, with the right technician, with the right skills, shows up at the right job at the right time. And we measure the success in terms of customer satisfaction, and it all happens as close to real time as possible. And so these are just phenomenal ways that the world is getting more software driven. The world is becoming more programmable, and I think very soon we'll enter an era of and we heard a little bit about this last night. Which I call augmented intelligence. So all these machine algorithms, machine learning, data analytics are really going to augment human intelligence and do it at the speed of light instantaneously.
Yeah, and it's exciting. There's so much innovation now where the point at which humans begin to interact with the data is so much further than it once was. And the amount of manipulation that's necessary from a person is so much less as a result. And just the number of errors, to say nothing of the quality of the decisions that can be made as a result of that, is quite different. Stephanie, one of the things I think is so important for all CIOs, no matter where you live, or we happen to be in California today, but to have kind of a touch point with the venture capital community, with tech startups of various kinds, to get your finger on the pulse as IT leaders as to how are the strategic imperatives that are being raised by my organization potentially resolved, issues resolved, opportunities seized a bit quicker by virtue of having some insight as to what new technologies can fit some of those needs and some of those opportunities. And Stephanie, you're a big believer in that. You're a fellow Washingtonian. We both live in the Washington area, but you spend a lot of time out here. And one of the stories that I love of yours is a recognition of the power of geospatial. Having investigated that a bit, having gotten to know some of the players in geospatial, but as the genesis of this, understanding the power of that to impact work done in the field. And I know you've got a couple stories on that. I wonder if you could share one or two of those.
So if I can just take one step back. So I really think about technology and digital as being disruptive to the business of development. So I would start at its very highest level. If you look at a company like Airbnb or Uber, you know what they allow us to do? They allow us to create shared prosperity in our markets because you're taking underutilized assets and you're creating revenue for the people who own them. So at the FIFA World Cup, 1/5 of all the rooms in Brazil were actually rented by Airbnb. So we were able to take local citizens and help them make a little bit more money. So that's kind of the first layer. And then if you come down another layer, we grapple all the time with things like, how do we actually know that we're making progress against shared prosperity and alleviating poverty? One of the things that we've done is we've done household surveys. So household surveys are very, very expensive, and there are 70 countries in the world that can't afford to do one every year, or even every 3 years. They do them every 10 years. It's very difficult for us to say, are we making progress against alleviating poverty if you can't afford to do a household survey? So we took a step back, and I had just been out in the Valley, and we had met a really interesting company called Orbital Insights, which has an interesting business model where a bunch of standard business school guys went out to the different satellite companies and said, let's revenue share your data feeds. And so they do a lot with hedge funds, and you kind of get how they make money. But for us, we were able to say, okay, let's look at what you guys know about Sri Lanka. So what areas of the country do we see electrification at night? Where do we see four-wheeled cars? Where do we see two-wheelers? Where do we see pockets of poverty from the geospatial data? And what can we extrapolate from that to say we may ultimately be making headway in relation to alleviating poverty without asking countries to do household surveys every day? And then you can take that down a whole nother layer. So we lend a lot of money to governments to do things like build roads. So in Indonesia, we'll build a great big highway, and then we lend a little bit more money to the governments, and we say, okay, now this is your road maintenance fund, so please make sure you take care of this road. And so, the road in front of the president's house is beautifully paved. The congestion over here, he has no idea. The potholes over here, he has no idea. And the road maintenance fund keeps getting spent, and all the important government officials have very beautiful roads in front of their houses. So how do we fix things like that? We took a bunch of sensors and we've been putting them on automobiles, and we can pull that data in now and say, this is actually where you should be dispersing your road maintenance money. So we can actually control without physically flying someone to Indonesia or flying groups of engineers to say, how is this road being maintained? Mm-hmm. We can disperse our money using sensor data and actually become more effective and efficient. Mm. So it all plays together. I mean, in the bank itself, we're full of economists, so we don't have the data scientists or the technology platforms to be able to make those kinds of decisions. So every time I come to the Valley, I come back with 5 or 6 really interesting companies, and I'll say this is something we ought to look at. So the last time I was out, I was actually with the Sequoia teams, and they've been working with a drone company. And these guys put a pod in Rwanda, and they actually have consolidated all the medical supplies, all the blood, all the refrigerated medicines that need to be, taken care of. So more efficient, more effective, and they can fly these drones to any one of the clinics within a 45-minute period. So blood gets where it needs to go, medicines get where it needs to go, and it's all done with text. Mm. So you bring those kinds of things back, and then you say maybe we can make more progress against alleviating poverty than we think using technology.
Yeah, I think it's such a great example of the CIO as the advisor to the rest of the organization, sort of constantly interpreting the needs, but also bringing to them ideas that are creative and, as I say, can help get some shortcuts to doing well by doing good in the case of the World Bank. Mike, I wanted to talk to you a bit about Omni-channel. Mm-hmm. As one thinks about innovations in retail, omni-channel is certainly one of those topics on the lips of a lot of executives as well as consumers. And I know it's something from your days at Tesco and now continuing in your days at Target that you think an awful lot about. Can you talk about where we are sort of in that evolution and some of your own plans when it comes to that?
Sure. I don't think the word omni-channel is known by any consumer, by the way. I think it's totally an industry insider term. But the reality of what's happened over the past few years, in particular with mobile, is that we all the retailers went through a thing of having channels, right? So you built up an e-commerce channel, you already had a stores channel, and then you evolved that over time. The reality of today is that consumers use mobile devices for every single shopping trip. Pretty much. I mean, it's involved in nearly every shopping trip. So they don't consciously make the decision, I'm going to buy something online or I'm going to go down to the store and buy it. But in each of those instances, they'll use their mobile phone to do a bit of product research, perhaps, to check up whether inventory is available and to get personalized offers through their smartphones. So the Omni, it was funny, I was at NRF this year. I don't know if you know NRF, but it's a big retailing conference in New York, a tech retail thing. And it's probably the biggest in the world, and it happens every January. What was kind of interesting going there this year is that nobody talked about Omni-channel. And nobody talked about Omni-channel because it just is. You know, it doesn't need to get talked about anymore because it is the way customers shop with us. It's the way we just live our lives. So it's part of the fabric now of every single shopping trip. So we look at, in Target, we look at, mobile as being an essential part of all of the shopping trips for our guests, and how do we use mobile to make that an easier, better, simpler experience? Real simple example. I got home from New York one night, needed a shirt. Because I hadn't done the washing, and I needed a shirt for an interview the next morning. I could go on just go onto the mobile, see that we had inventory of a shirt in my local store. If I'd wanted to, I could have reserved it. I could have gone there and picked it and reserved it. But that would be a hugely convenient experience for me to know that the shirt I wanted was there in that store. The app even told me whereabouts in the store it was. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing took me a few minutes. And that's a fairly typical experience now with our guests. So we'll continue to build upon that as a base as we go forward. That mobile is just as important for the customers who come in and physically shop in our stores as those who choose to shop with us online.
Yeah. Ron, I wonder if you could take a moment, and I do want to open up to the audience for questions, so please prepare those if you would, and the microphones will come around and find you. Ron, the group here, no doubt, are in varying levels of maturity when it comes to gathering the sorts of data from customers to draw appropriate insights. For those who may be a few sort of rungs further down on the ladder than our fellow panelists, can you talk about some of the things you would recommend that they do in order to advance the cause within their enterprises?
Absolutely. Well, I think this is such a critical time to have this partnership between the technology organization and the business to get closer to the customer, right? So it often will start off. We'll help customers with putting together. What are the top priorities where understanding the customer better can really drive results, right? To put together a roadmap and think about what investments you can incrementally make in technology and how do you measure success, right? So we see, a key thing is being able to say, well, the business, in order to have an impact from this, you're going to have to work through what's the role of data science and analytics, how does technology support it? And I think it's an incredibly important conversation because what we see happening in so many companies is you've got this siloing, right? We've seen a lot of the control, in marketing departments and other parts of the organization where the tendency is, well, we're just going to do this ourselves. We don't want to partner with the IT organization. We're going to go and buy, this SaaS application to understand this one channel or to do this one attribution model or whatnot. And what you see happening is over time, you get this horrible mess of dozens of silos of information that aren't consistent, that don't work together. And typically what you see is this is a real opportunity for the technology organization to put that together and say, look, we're going to partner with you, but there's value in integrating this data. There's value in having an agile approach of pulling the data together and starting to drive analytic insights. And we see a lot of organizations that are going beyond these kind of pre-canned package models and saying, well, we want to do something that's more reflective of our unique interaction with customers, our data sets. So it's typically getting started with a clear roadmap, then having a foundation of how do you integrate that data together. And the big thing in the data lake, I suspect a lot of people are familiar with that concept, but the idea that you can have a place that you capture all this rich data without having to do all the curation and governance and management of that data that traditionally was in a data warehouse, which nobody ever really got around to building because things were moving so fast, right? So instead, have it available, and then an agile approach of you can partner with the business on pilot projects, get a tiger team together, and start to change the way you do things and measure, not just are you have a technical capability, but are you getting the organizational adoption, right? Are you getting the business to start cross-pollinating and sharing and putting more demands in to scale the program? Right, so that's how we see people succeeding and applying these technologies to really understand the consumer better. That's great. Why don't we open up for questions? And actually this time, if you're asking a question, if you could let us know where you're from, who you are, where you're from. And if it's directed to a specific individual, obviously let us know. Yes. Scott.
So Ron, just to follow up on that last question.
Scott Gilbert from Marsh & McLennan. I'll do it for you.
Okay, thank you. So just in contemplating a data architecture along the lines that you've just talked about, what advice do you have for a large company that has defined business units or operating companies? Do you can either look at it as a data lake for each of them or a data lake for the entire enterprise. Any experience or advice on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it, this is one of the questions where context matters, that, we see the large enterprises, the top 100, 200 companies in the world probably are not going to have a single data lake with all their data, right? There still will tend to be good reasons to have separation of data by topical area, large business unit. So there's a lot of value. There's sort of a right size, right? You want to have the right amount of, there's some Goldilocks rules here, right? You want to have the right amount, like enough pooling of data to have some value from it, but at the same time, enough separation that groups that are very independent and different will have different reasons. So, you probably have some separation between things like looking at security and maybe looking at things like product, right? So we're seeing organizations that will typically have a few data lakes, but we see also companies that have gone so far that they've got lots of experimentation with Hadoop, and they have a lot of little puddles and a lot of duplication, a lot of inconsistency, and so you can go too far that way as well.
Question. Oh, there's a question over here.
Yeah, hi. So Sheila Jordan, CIO for Symantec. I would love to get all of your perspectives on how much you're seeing and using data more real time. I still think as organizations, we spend so much time on the transactional data and looking in the rearview mirror and historically, where yet you talk about IoT, we talk about mobile, we talk about using data in a way we're changing the conversation with our customers. Can each of you address that? And what percentage of time is moving more into real time?
We'd like to go first.
A couple of thoughts here. So the example I cited before in terms of our installation maintenance on our networks, Sheila, that is real time. So our technicians, while they're working one job, they don't know which next job they're going to go to. It's all done via scheduling algorithms and customers and other requirements coming in, flowing in real time, and availability of crew, trucks, spare parts, and demand on a very large network basis. So that's one example. The other example I would give is marketing. So our marketing has moved from what used to be an art to a data science. So our marketing programs, our marketing advertising spend is getting more and more data-driven. And there I would say what used to be decision-making timelines of several months has moved to days and perhaps weeks, where our marketing promotions, our customer engagement programs are built with real-time data feedback loops. So we roll out an ad or we roll out a promotion. Within hours, within minutes, we get feedback through customer sentiment, behavior. This is all external data. Customers, consumers today have a very strong voice. They do express their opinions through social media. They do express their opinions through product reviews. And as Mike was saying, more and more customers engage through their mobile phones. So our marketing is also moved, and I consider that pretty real time when you're driving your marketing programs and getting feedback loops, which are in hours versus what used to be months.
Roger, I think it's a great point how there's a big shift that classically a lot of organizations had statisticians who would kind of on a handcrafted basis build a model and then roll it out. And really the world's shifting to this world of continuously scoring and training models and continuously A/B testing them. So that real time needs to involve that discipline, the DevOps, where you're constantly evolving and iterating, and you have the frameworks to run many experiments in parallel.
Right.
Maybe one more. Anyone else wants to?
Well, I think the obvious implementation in retail is personalization. So and that's about as real time as you get, because the personalized offers will give you are not only aware of you as a customer and your behavior, but they're also context aware. They know where you are, or they know what you've been doing on our website. So it's absolutely it's marketing absolutely in real time.
Excellent. Well, with that, join me in thanking Ron, Roger, Mike, and Stephanie.
Cheers.